This is the Niobrara County Library. We're doing a series of oral histories with people from the county and the city. Our first one today is with Phyllis Hahn, who is a forever, pretty much, resident almost of Niobrara County and the Lusk area, a member of the historic Wilson family, a business owner, former business owner, and just a person who is busy with everything in the city and the county. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I thought we might start with memories of your childhood.
Oh goodness, where do we start? The oldest memory?
Of course, that would be great.
Okay, I was riding on the train when we still had passenger trains between Lusk and Douglas, that would have been. And I was going with my mother to the hospital in Douglas because I had developed an infection and they were going to put me in the hospital. And I remember that especially because that was when they treated people with probably unproven methods. They wrapped me in what they called a hot pack. And it was a sheet dipped in water that was steaming. And they wrapped me in it over and over and over, and I couldn't get my arms loose, and I panicked. And I remember that very clearly. I was 20 months old. So that's a pretty early memory. But I also remember being in the passenger car in the train. I wanted to go home and go to bed because I didn't feel good.
Oh, I suppose. I do have a question about that train ride, though.
Yes.
Where did you catch the train?
Probably at Manville, because my folks were living at their homestead at that time, which was 9.5 miles north of Lost Springs.
That was the Harney Creek Ranch,
yes,
is that right?
Right.
So you caught it, you took a car, I suppose,
yes,
at that time, right?
Right.
To Manville and caught the train and then went all the way to Douglas.
Right.
Good, okay. I'm going to have more questions about railroads later.
Okay. And then I remember the nurse brought me a page from a magazine with a paper doll on it. And she had a pair of scissors she handed me, and they had a point on them. And I looked at them, and my verbal skills weren't too good yet, and I was so shy. And I looked at that, and I thought, I don't think I'm supposed to play with that. I don't know how to use scissors. But I thought, I remember thinking it was really very nice of her to try to bring me something.
Oh, that's a great memory for 20 months.
I really think so, because most people say, well, you can't remember anything before, what, 3, 4? But I would challenge that.
Yes, I think you would. Well, tell me about your family.
I'm the third one of 5 children. And I had an older sister, 4 years older, an older brother, 1 year older, a younger brother, 1 year younger, and a younger sister, 4 years younger. So I was truly a middle child. And so from what I was reading about you, you lived at the Harney Creek Ranch. Until I was 4.
Then you moved to the Running Water Ranch.
No, my great uncle George had homesteaded north of Manville, and my cousin Ann Whitehead is living there now. And we lived there for 2 years. Just before I was 6, we moved to the Running Water Range, which would have been in 1936. And I will go back and regress to one other thing. I would love to have been born in Niobrara County, but my mother went to Douglas to have her baby. So I was born in Douglas, which is a nice place, but I wanted to say I had lived in Niobrara all this time.
So I wasn't clear about whether the Harney Creek Ranch was in Converse or Niobrara.
Part of it, it was in both. I think there was property in both places.
Well, tell me about growing up then. So tell me about what your family was doing, what the kids were doing, how your mother was handling all this, how you fought, your hired people.
Well, when we lived on my dad's homestead, north of Lost Springs, that place has petrified wood, Indian artifacts and fossils, and a lot of wonderful places to run in the hills. We had to be very careful about rattlesnakes because there are rattlesnake dens in that area. We played outside a lot. And with brothers and sisters, we had a lot. We did have a neighbor that gave us a bit of problems. My grandfather had hired this gentleman that came walking down the railroad as a teenager, and he was black. And he went by the nickname of Nigger Jim, but we knew that we were not supposed to say that to his name. And I remember seeing him ride up on his black horse. He was wearing black, and he was a very black man. And we were scared to death of him because my dad and he had a bit of a feud going on because he would put his fences out 40 feet to gain a little more acreage. My dad, as a graduate of the University of Wyoming with a degree in civil engineering, knew how to survey, and he would put the fences back. So they had a bit of a battle going on there, and we were scared to death when we saw him riding up. We ran to hide in the barn, and some of them, I think, ended up in the hills, in the gullies beyond the house. So that's a childhood memory of somebody that has a lot of history in this community.
It does, indeed. Yes. And so then your mother had help, I think you told us once.
Not until we moved to Manville. We had what we called a hired girl. And there were families with lots of children that were happy to have one of their daughters getting food on the table, something to eat, and a little bit of money, and the responsibility of helping with everything, just keeping track of that many kids. My youngest sister was born when we were living in Manville. So when we moved there, she was added to the family after that. But we had a couple ponies. One was Shetland, and one we called an Indian pony. She was barrel-chested, which means pot-bellied. And we rode her until we were old enough to climb on a full-size horse. And we did ride and enjoy the rides. When we moved to Manville, friends would wangle a weekend visit because they liked to come out and visit the ranch so they could maybe ride the horse.
Yes, you were popular.
And they also got some other interesting experiences in later years. I hadn't thought about it because for me it was normal. But my mother was accustomed to cooking just about everything. She grew up in a very conservative family in Kansas, and she had come out as a nurse to Wyoming, and that's how she ended up in Wyoming doing nursing. And we would have things like fried turtle's quite tasty, as well as rabbit, and all the different parts of a beef animal, and the chicken too. Have you ever eaten chicken's feet?
I have not.
I have.
Crunchy, I suppose.
Well, you peel that scaly skin off, and it's kind of fatty in there, kind of like pig's feet. But we ate a lot of things my mother knew was safe to eat, like dandelions before they bloom and the ants get into them. That became part of our salads. She knew what different things were safe to eat. We picked a lot of chokecherries and wild currants and things that we even had sand cherries in, but I have not seen them for years. I don't know why they disappeared. But they were a little larger than a chokecherry, and they grew close to the ground on a little tiny low bush.
Now the Running Water Ranch is right on the river.
It is. It has the original water rights on the Niobrara River. And I assume they still own that, although I think the government would like to assume that.
Well, what was it like living right on the river? Because there was a lot of water flow. I imagine there were mosquitoes. I imagine there were floods, but a great place to play too.
Absolutely. My dad made 2 rowboats. First one was 6 feet long. We all knew that we had to wear life jackets before we climbed into that because he wanted us to be safe, and he wanted us to go by the rules. And then when that got waterlogged, then he made an 8-foot. And they sometimes used that to fix fence that went across we called it a creek. When it was there, it was more of a creek than a river.
It's not very wide there.
No, and it's flowing pretty slowly. But it had snapping turtles and water snakes and mud suckers and dace and water, all kinds of water bugs. We would see anything from an otter to a loon on the river. A lot of wildlife. We really had an outdoor education. Oh, fireflies in the summer on a hot summer night. That was such fun. We'd try to go out and catch them and then put them in a hollyhock to see if they would shine through, but they don't.
I could try. Did you swim? Were you allowed to swim?
Not in that. No, because there was a lot of moss and it was not a safe. And here's another thing. Ranchers or people who settled early days probably had located their house next to the river. So the overflow, if they were lucky enough to have indoor plumbing, it would all flow out into the river unfiltered. And we weren't about to put our feet into that water because we knew what went into that water. Yes.
Were there any fish in it? Did you go fishing?
There were dace, but we didn't fish there. We loved to go camping on in the mountains south of Douglas. We would get pitch a tent. That was my family's idea of a vacation. We never went to visit people. We went to camp out, and we would catch brook trout. And there's nothing better than a fresh caught brook trout. But we did that all the years I was at home.
And your father then, let's see, it was a cattle ranch, but at one time it was a sheep ranch too.
Yes, they trailed sheep up from, I'm not sure, Cheyenne or somewhere. They were originally Mexican sheep, I think. Ann could tell you more of that sort of thing than I can. But they trailed them all the way and didn't lose one, I'm told. And they had them, I think, partly for weed control, and they grazed the ground a little too much. And then